Hi everybody, Captain Al speaking with your time training tips and 10 ticks targeted to teaching technical type transport travel through tailored tiny takeaways. The question for today, episode 6, explain the VNAV descent page for the Boeing 747-400 and Boeing 747-8. We're in the virtual simulator to answer the question of the day, what does the VNAV descent page do? The descent page is page 3 of the VNAV pages. You can see right now we're on page 2, which is the active cruise page. But once we pass the top of descent, that cruise page will change to the active descent page. The top of descent right now is 24 miles ahead of us. We're due to get there at 2151 Zulu. And we're at 2147 Zulu. So we're approaching about 3 minutes within the top of descent point. When that happens, and if you don't have a lower altitude set in the MCP, then the computer will try to remind you to reset the MCP altitude. And it's doing that because you're approaching the top of descent point, and it figures that's when you want to start down. So if you have not had ATC clearance by that point, well, you may have to stay at flight level 190 if that's what ATC wants you to do. And then you'll probably get high in the path, but we have to comply with ATC instructions. But if you've requested lower and ATC has given you lower, then you can set in a lower altitude. Of course, this is all programmed as part of an arrival. So part of the flight plan was to put in an arrival, and the arrival is the Crater 2 arrival for runway 28. And on the legs page, you'll notice we have the active waypoint is Bozo, and then Helms, and then Crater, and then Hiker, where there's a restriction to cross Hiker at or below 9,000 but above 7,000. And then there's a restriction to cross Liquid at 6,000. And so far we haven't put in, and here's part of the arrivals, Sassoon and Shane, and then a 108 track for vectors. But we have not put in the approach yet, and we're going to leave the approach out for now, just to look at the descent page and what it does. And so if we go back to our VNAV push button, it takes us to the active page. Page 3 is the descent page. And you'll notice the end of descent point right now is the 6,000 feet at Liquid, because that's the waypoint with the lowest altitude constraint. When you put in the ILS approach, then you'll probably get the end of descent point. It will probably be the runway with whatever the altitude is at the runway, because that will be the lowest waypoint with the lowest altitude restriction. The best econ speed is what it plans to fly, 296 during the descent. Once it gets to around 10,000 feet, it's going to go ahead and slow to 240 knots. And there'll be 2 deceleration circles. You can see them right here on the ND. The first one is the start of deceleration. The second one is the end of deceleration. So the first one, it'll start to slow from this speed of 296 to 240. And by the time we reach the second circle at Crater, we'll be at 240 knots at 10,000, ready to continue on down to whatever we're cleared to. In this case, he's probably going to clear us to 6,000 via the Crater arrival into Portland. You'll notice it's not 250 because it gives you a 10-knot buffer, basically, in case there's an unforecast tailwind. Now you'll notice for this segment, I did not put in any waypoint winds. It's a short segment. It's probably not going to matter all that much whether I put in a bunch of winds here or not. But if we wanted to put waypoint winds and we wanted to enter them manually, we would select the route data page. And remember, the route data page is off of the legs page. So we go legs, route data, whatever waypoint we want. Let's say it's Helms. We select the carroted prompt. And then we could put in an altitude. And when we do, let's say we put in 5,000 just for the heck of it. When you put that in, it'll put that altitude in, and then it'll give you dashes to put in the wind. So if we wanted, let's say we knew the wind was 180 at 22, and we put that in. And then if we put the winds at 19,000, let's say, then you'll notice it's going to place that above the 15,000 because it's higher. And then we could put in a winds, and if we know what that is. So let's say 200 at 25. And we'll put that in. And if you go back to your route data page, then you'll see that we have pilot entered winds at Helms. And then from there, these winds are propagated downrange. So if you go to the next waypoint, which is Crater, you'll notice those winds are in small font. And then we could always look at our flight plan and then create winds here at Crater, and what are they at 15,000, what are they at flight level 190, and put those in. So that's how you manually would put in winds. We discussed the other day how you could put them in via the data link system via a uplink, in which case they're all put there. On this particular short segment, I didn't put any winds, but this is the way you would enter pilot entered winds. And of course, on the VNAV descent page, you do have the ability to also put in forecast winds from your flight plan, or again, uplink them. This all has an effect on moving the top of descent point, so it makes it more accurate. Same thing with a thermal anti-ice on altitude. That's going to move the top descent point back if you anticipate you're going to be bringing on thermal anti-ice. Now you'll notice again that our best econ speed is going to be 296. We could change this again. We could do it through the CDU. We could do it up here. But in VNAV, it's going to attempt to track a path versus a speed. So the speed is going to be allowed to vary. That's a target speed. And when we actually cross the top of descent, we're going to get a vertical path indication. And we're going to get the nav performance scales also indicating the VNAV path indication. And then at that point, we're actually tracking a path, and it will allow the speed to vary. In the Dash 8, it's a off-idle descent. So unlike the 400, you're not going to see this go to idle and then to hold. It will simply stay in speed. You're also going to see some VNAV speed bands appear up to about VMO minus 11 and then down to your target speed and a little below that. And then, of course, they will change when you get to your speed transition. It'll become a much narrower band, about 15 knots above this, 240 to 255, and then a little bit under this. But the auto throttle will maintain speed. And of course, if you get fast, you'll get a message saying drag required, indicating you need to add some speed brake to stay on the path and stay on target speed or close to target speed, because maybe we have an unforecast tailwind. The speed restriction line, again, is just like the speed restriction line on the climb page. You can put in a speed and altitude, and it will maintain that. And then, of course, just like on the climb page, you have the restriction here at Hiker to cross at or below 9,000 but above 7,000. That's the next restriction in line. You can see that's the first restriction here. And then after we pass that, then we'll get this restriction of liquid. And you'll also get the this is where you'd see an error message that you're going to be 2 miles long, and the altitude you'll cross that waypoint at. So it gives you an error message basically telling you how far long or short you're going to be, and then how high or low you're going to be at that waypoint. So it gives you information, and then you get the unable next altitude message as well. This waypoint altitude is based on whatever's up here. So you got Hiker, you're going to have Hiker here. And this would give you the flight path angle of the airplane at that time in the descent. It gives you a vertical bearing information from the airplane to this point to Hiker, and then it gives you the vertical speed based on that bearing information. I actually don't use this. Maybe it's me, but I don't find this information all that useful. But it is the current flight path angle of the airplane, the vertical bearing from the airplane to that Hiker position, and then the vertical speed to maintain that bearing to that waypoint. Forecast we talked about. Descend now is going to be replaced by descend direct once we cross the top of descent point. But right now it's calling for, if you want it to descend earlier than the top of descent point, you could select descend now and execute, and as long as you have a lower altitude in here, it'll go ahead and start the VNAV descent now. It'll maintain 1250 foot per minute until it picks up the path, and then once it picks up the path, it'll then continue down to stay on the path. And the off-path descent prompt will take you to the off-path descent page. So once you start getting vectored off the route, if you want to go present position direct to a waypoint, you can kind of gauge from this page whether you'll need idle thrust and no speed brakes, idle thrust and partial speed brakes, or idle thrust and full speed brakes. We'll kind of demonstrate this a little bit as we go. So I'm going to release the sim, and we're going to kind of watch what happens here as we approach the top of descent point. When you get within about 3 minutes, I'll go back to the cruise page. And so you'll see as we approach, we're still estimating 2151, and we're at 2148. So we should very shortly get that reset MCP altitude message in the scratch pad saying, hey, if you want to start down, you need to set a lower altitude if you want to start down at the top of descent point. And we're only going to start down at the top of descent point if ATC were to clear us down. Okay, there comes the message, reset MCP altitude. Looks like it did it actually, about 2 minutes before. So we'll go ahead and we'll say we're cleared down to 6,000 on that arrival. So we'll set in a lower altitude. If you did not set in a lower altitude, then it would just go from VNAV path to VNAV ALP when it crossed the top of descent point, and it will not descend. It would stay at flight level 190. But we've set a lower altitude, so as we pass the top of descent point, you'll notice that the vertical deviation indicator will come up on the ND over in this lower right corner of the ND, and then you'll notice the nav performance scales are going to come alive here and give us the pointer for the VNAV path. And the enunciation, of course, is not going to change. It's going to stay in VNAV path. And now we truly are on a path from the top of descent point to the end of descent point. And again, the end of descent point is liquid at 6,000 because we have not put in approach. And then again, here's the 2 deceleration circles. And so we'll watch it do that. This video will be a little longer than 10 minutes because of the descent page has a little more to it. So coming up on the top of descent point now, you'll see that the VNAV cruise page will change to the descent page automatically. And there goes the top of descent point. And you notice the page change to descent page. Notice we have the vertical deviation indicator here. Notice we have the nav performance scale here. Notice the thrust levers are on their way back, but they do not go to idle. This is going to stay speed. It doesn't go to idle thrust, unlike the 400. It's an off-idle descent. And the vertical scale will also show the RNP and the ANP in feet. Just like it does laterally, it does in miles. RNP of 2 miles, ANP of 0.06. This is in feet. The RNP is 400, and the ANP is the actual navigation performance is 120 feet, well within limits of the 400 feet. This ANP, actual navigation performance, well within limits of the 2 miles. You'll also notice we got a VNAV speed band here. It's about 15 knots less than VMO-MMO, and it goes down to about 280 knots, about 15 knots below your target speed. There's our target speed is 296. Again, that speed will be allowed to vary if it needs to stay on the path. You notice the power is coming up now to hold the speed, and so far it has not descended yet. Should start to descend here shortly. There it goes. Now you also see the green arc come down, because the green arc is referencing your current vertical rate to get to that altitude, what's in the MCP. So it's referencing this 6,000 feet. And of course we'd set in our altimeter of whatever it is at Portland. We'll say it's, we're not going to land here, so we'll just wag it for now. Let's put in 3000 for the altimeter. So we're approaching the transitional level at 18,000, and we'll change over to 3000 inches. And you'll notice that we're right on the path. We're not at idle thrust, we're in speed. We're holding 1,700 feet a minute. It's holding the speed nicely. In other words, everything is pretty much on forecast right now. Even though we didn't put any winds in here, it still seems to be holding the path very well here. There's our next restriction. The computer's predicting we can do that just fine because this is blank. And then here's this information. Our flight path angle is minus 2.6. Our vertical bearing is 1.9, and that's the vertical rate to stay on that bearing. Again, I don't particularly use this because I don't know what to make of all these numbers. So I'm not looking at that. I'm looking more at what's happening on the ND and what's happening in terms of the vertical profile goes. Notice descend now, it was replaced by descend direct. So this would be, if he cleared us unrestricted here and we hit descend direct and execute, it's going to wipe out all restrictions between you but not including the MCP altitude window. So if I did this right now, it would wipe out this restriction, but it would not wipe out this restriction at liquid at 6, because we'd have 6 in the window. So it'd wipe out this one. You see we're reaching this first deceleration circle. There's the first deceleration circle. And now it's going to start decelerating at 240 knots. Notice the rate of descent is starting to decrease toward 10,000 feet. And it'll maintain 10 until we get slowed up to 240, and then it will continue the descent to cross Hiker at or below 9,000 but above 7,000. And it's still doing a bang-up job of staying on the path. I think the Dash 8 is probably a little more advanced when it comes to staying on the path, because that did a nice job even when I increased the speed. The 400 wouldn't do that. Again, why 240 instead of 250? Well, again, it's giving you a 10-knot buffer in case there's an unforecast tailwind. You notice this VNAV speed band now goes up 15 knots. So it gives you a 15-knot buffer before it would be, if there was a really large tailwind and it exceeded that VNAV speed band, eventually it would leave the path. It would not try to maintain the path anymore. It'll go into VNAV speed once it leaves that, but you can see the range that it has to control with here. It's not as great as it was before at 10,000. Just past the second circle deceleration, and now we're out of 10. We're close to 240. And again, we're heading down to 6,000. Our restriction is to cross Hiker at or below 9 but above 7. And so once we meet that and pass Hiker, then it'll go down to the, then liquid will replace it. Again, the arc is referencing what's in here. It's not referencing what's here. So this is where, based on this current vertical rate that varies sometimes, that this arc will move in and out, but it is referencing what's in the MCP window. Again, you could always set this to 7,000 or above. You know, we could have put this at 7,000, then when we see we have it made, then go down to 6,000. That's one way of doing it. The other way is to just put it right down to 6,000 and then just monitor that it's going to do this. The Boeing way is actually to put it at 7,000 in this case. And once you see you got that 7 made at hiker, 7 or above, then you can spin the window down to 6,000. And I'm going to get ready to take the heading and move off the, I should have had that in front of me, but I've been yakking. So I'm going to take that heading bug and move it, let's move it out here somewhere. Actually, I better go to terrain and make sure there's no, because there are hills around here. So let's bring this down a little bit. Let's go to terrain. And I'll bring my range up a little bit so we can see. Let's see what terrain we got here. Yeah, the higher terrain's off to the left, so I'm going to go off to the right a little bit. So you'll notice as we cross a hiker, now liquid is the next restriction in there at 6,000, and we're continuing down to 6,000. We met that restriction. Notice the arc is right over liquid now at 6. And what we're going to do is go to heading select now. So I'm going to go heading select and veer off here, veer off the path. And we're going to describe this off-path descent a little bit. So let's say we can use Subsonic here. If we go to off-path descent page and go to legs page, and we'll bring Subsonic to the scratch pad, and we'll bring it back to that off-path descent page. We'll put that in the descend to Subsonic. And let's say we want to just estimate, where are we, 6,000. Maybe if we can make it Subsonic at 4,000. We'll put that in there as a altitude, and then if we turn on our display, you'll notice that, and I'll make the heading a little closer here to get to Subsonic. We're going to stay at 6,000. You'll notice now that we're off the path, it starts to say, well, gee, I don't have to descend you so much, so this would be a good time to go flight level change, because it's going to kind of hesitate in getting us to 6. And again, if ATC wanted us down, now that we're off this routing, and we don't have to cross liquid at 6, but we need to descend to 6, you notice VNAV stopping us from doing that, so we just go flight level change now and start down to 6,000. The blue is the clean circle, and it's kind of telling you that from your present position, let me bring my range down so you can see this a little bit more. You always want to go up on it. We're right here, the tip of the triangle, and to get to Subsonic present position direct, it's telling us that we could do so by descending with idle thrust clean, and we'll make it to Subsonic no problem because we're outside of the clean circle. But if I kind of take my heading bug and let's go toward that clean circle. Anytime you penetrate the clean circle, and you can see the clean circle is 3 miles ahead of us, and we're referencing 4,000 to go from 6 to 4. So the clean circle is telling us that, yeah, from here to here, idle thrust, I can get there at 4,000 feet. But as soon as I penetrate this clean circle, I'll get the drag circle, and that'll be a white dashed line. And that tells me that I have to add partial speed brakes with idle thrust to get to Subsonic by 4,000 feet. And then if I'm at the drag circle, inside of the drag circle, even with thrust levers at idle with full speed brakes, you won't be able to make Subsonic. So let's go put the heading bug right to Subsonic now. You're going to see we're going to penetrate the clean circle. As soon as you do that, you'll get the drag circle. So right now you should see that pop up. And there it is, and the drag circle is right in here, 2 miles. Right now we could still make it if we go idle thrust with some form of speed brake. But when I get to this drag circle, right at the drag circle, I could still make it idle thrust, full speed brakes, But if you're inside of that drag circle, forget it. You're not going to make it, even with thrust levers with full speed brakes. So right now I could still make it as long as I went to idle speed brakes right now. But once I get inside of this, it's then saying you can't make it even with idle thrust and full speed brakes. So that's the off-path descent. It just allows you to evaluate a waypoint with an altitude when you're off the LNAV routing and you still want information to, can I make it to this point at that altitude? And again, you can turn the display on and off with this selection. That'll be it for the descent page, so we will call it a day there with the descent page. Thanks for watching.